Even always like have a conversation with the 사장님 and we just like have a good time together. They're always like, 한국어 왜 이렇게 잘하시네요? Like every single time they're so shocked. But now they know me. Most of the restaurants know me by now. So. 딩아, 저는 오스트리아에서 온 드라가입니다. 반갑습니다. 아직도 한국어 그렇게 잘 할 수 없으니까 아마 80%? 문화적으로는 다 익숙해졌어요. 아마 90%? 네. 오스트리아에서 한국의 이미지는 많이 바뀌었어요. 왜냐하면 예전에는 오스트리아 사람들이 한국에 대해서 잘 모르거든요. 지금 모를 수가 없지. 한국 진짜 강한 이미지가 있어요. I think my friends started to talk more and more about Korean culture to me because they started watching movies like Parasite or Squid Game, and it became so viral all over the world that it's basically impossible not to see Korea as like a very influential country. I think as people started to watch more like K-dramas in movies, the image about Korean people changed because overall there is quite a negative stereotype in the world about like men, for example, not being very masculine, and maybe in K-pop they do wear makeup and things like that, but I think it's actually a really good thing because it's breaking negative, toxic, masculine like stereotypes. You know, men can be so many different things, and it's amazing to see that, you know, men are allowed to wear makeup, men are allowed to be fashionable, men are allowed to look good. I really enjoy that a lot of people in the West too are accepting that. They changed the Western perspective on what masculinity is because, you know, a man doesn't have to be a tall, muscly, bearded man, but can also features more feminine traits. Not that many, actually. I think mostly people who are Korean and live in Austria are coming to study because Austria is famous for opera singing. So a lot of people who are into classical music come to Austria to study an instrument or study singing. But there are still some Koreans that own their own businesses, for example, restaurants or supermarkets or things like that. Actually, Korean culture had a huge influence all over the world over the past few years, and you can definitely see that in Austria too. I have definitely seen a huge rise in Korean restaurants around Vienna. Every time I used to go back to Austria, I would miss Korean food, so I would want to go and eat some Korean food. A lot of new Korean restaurants started opening up. Yeah, there are some actually pretty good ones. So what used to be the case actually was that these Korean restaurant owners used to own Japanese restaurants because Japanese food used to be popular back in the days, but now Korean food is becoming more and more. A lot of restaurants are switching basically to Korean food, which is really, really nice. Yeah, I think it's great, you know, like it's good to see that there are actually options and that you can have some good Korean food like in different countries. It's nice because Korea was not that famous like maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but it changed so much. And I've heard from a friend that recently they opened up Korean beauty store, like so you can find all sorts of Korean cosmetics in the city center of Vienna. So that just goes to show you how influential Korean culture has been over the past few years. These are actually pictures from when I went to Korean restaurants in Austria. So we have some barbecue, very nice marbled beef. The owner actually makes their own kimchi and 깍두기. It's really, really tasty. So I actually enjoy going there. I even always like have a conversation with the 사장님 and we just like have a good time together. Yeah, every time I just speak to them like 안녕하세요, 잘 지내셨어요? They're always like, 한국어 왜 이렇게 잘하시네요? Like every single time they're so shocked. But now they know me. Most of the restaurants know me by now. So I think it's pretty popular because not only have more and more Korean restaurants opened, which shows the great popularity and the demand for Korean food, but also every time I go to any of the Korean restaurants, usually it's full. There's a lot of people. I think people are just very interested in trying out Korea becoming so popular over the years. I think many people like to try it. I first learned about Korea when I was living in Spain. So I was super immersed into Spanish culture. I was learning how to speak the language. So I was completely immersed into Spanish culture and I was like, I need something new. I love to learn about new cultures. And I think that's when on the internet, Korean culture really started exploding. There were like YouTubers who were reacting to K-pop. I started watching that. Then I started watching some Korean variety shows. And then I started watching foreign YouTubers who live in Korea. And I was like, this is interesting. So there are foreigners who are actually, living a great life in Korea. And I was like, I kind of want to do that too. So that's where I got the inspiration from. Then I actually had a Korean friend at university. She went to university with me in England and she introduced me to all of her Korean friends at university. So I had lots of Korean friends before even coming to Korea. That's why I was like, I think moving to Korea would be a good choice. And I wanted to learn a new language. So Korea seemed like a really good choice for me. 일단은 음식 너무 맛있어 보여서 그거 다 먹어보고 싶었어요. 그래서 그거 제일 하고 싶었어요. 한국에 다시 온 지 2년쯤 됐는데 4년 전에 한국에 처음 왔거든요. 그때 소강어 학당 다녔어요. 근데 여권 문제가 있어서 그래서 오스트리아 다시 돌아가서 국적이 바뀌고 다시 돌아왔어요. 왜냐하면 한국어도 잘 배우고 싶었어요. 그리고 한국에 사는 게 너무 좋았어요. 음식도 좋고 사람들이 너무 친절해서 한국에 너무 보고 싶었어요. 네. When I first got interested in Korean culture, that was around maybe 2014. Korean culture wasn't that popular yet in Europe as much, I would say. People who like K-pop knew about Korea, but people who didn't know about any of that wasn't very familiar with Korea. So I remember when I kept telling everyone that I'm really interested in Korean culture and that I would like to move there, everyone was always asking me like, why there? Why not like maybe China or something like that? Because that's the Asian country they're more familiar with. And I was like, yeah, but I really like Korean culture and it's actually, a really, really fun country and there are so many things to do there. And I think over the years, I've really seen how people's minds have changed about Korea because I think people realize how much of a force Korea is and people ask me much more questions about it because they're like, I've watched this, like, have you ever been to this place or that place? And they're much more curious about Korea. I've definitely seen a growing interest in Korean culture. I'm really happy because before I felt like people would think of me as like weird for being interested in Korean culture, but since it's become so popular, people find it, they engage with me a lot more. So it makes me feel really proud and happy that they like Korean culture. It's great that Korea is becoming more popular all over the world. I think Korea has so much to share and I think it's great that it's finally the time where Korea is being able to share all of these amazing cultural things all over the world. So I think we can all benefit from exchanging cultures and trying out different things. 오늘은 제가 고향에 돌아갔다 깜짝 놀란 점 말했습니다. 영상이 좋았다면 좋아요, 구독 눌러주세요. 안녕!